I'm what's known as a personal care attendant or direct support worker, and I work one-on-one with disabled clients. My client at the time was around 29 years old. He had been in a freak accident a few years prior and now needed someone like myself to help him in his day-to-day. I have worked for him for many years, and during this time it just so happened that he and his 4 daughters were living with my cousin in their home. At that time, I worked from 5 PM to 7 AM while my cousin was at work, and I did everything the client was unable to do, like housework, cooking, and generally any daily tasks that he needed help with. One night, after I put all the kids to bed and got my clients settled in, I went through the house and made sure all the lights were turned off and all the doors were locked. They also had a security system, but for some reason I forgot to arm it this time. At about 10 PM, I went to my cousin's bedroom to watch a movie on my laptop before going to sleep. About an hour into the movie, I headed to the kitchen for something to drink. It was dark, but I was used to the layout of the house, and so I didn't bother turning any lights on. Mainly because I didn't want to wake the kids or my client. All of a sudden, I heard a sound coming from the front door. I didn't immediately recognize it, but then it dawned on me. It was the doorknob rattling. I peeked out to see if anyone was at the door, and I saw no one. I checked all the doors and windows and made sure everyone was okay before heading back to the bedroom to finish my movie. After about 10 minutes, my laptop started acting up. It began to freeze and was making a really strange, high-pitched noise that I'd never heard before. I restarted it and it happened again and again and again. I shrugged it off and decided I was getting tired anyway, and thought about going to bed. I started to lie down when I heard footsteps in the hallway. It sounded like it was heading right towards the kids' room and the bedroom I was in. So I got up, flipped the hall light on, I peeked out of the door and into the hallway, and I saw no one. I was a little nervous now, but I once again walked through the house, checking on everybody and making sure the place was locked up. I started feeling very, very anxious at this point, and I just knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I turned on the TV and set the volume down low so I wouldn't disturb anyone. I sat for a moment when suddenly I heard a very familiar voice say my name. It sounded exactly like my dad. My dad who had passed away almost 10 years ago. I sat up. I looked around the room, but I saw no one. A little while later, out of the corner of my eye in the reflection of a large picture frame, I saw something move. I also heard more footsteps, and so I turned to look, and I couldn't see anything in front of me, but for a split second, I thought I saw my uncle's face in the reflection of that same glass picture frame. My uncle, who had also passed away some years prior. And then I heard his voice, and as clear as day he said, "You can't go to sleep." It was close to 2 AM at this point, and after almost 3 hours of constant unexplained activity, I decided I'd had enough, and so I walked over to the nightstand, grabbed the remote to arm the security system, pushed the button, and as soon as I stuck my knee on the bed, at that exact moment, somebody kicked in the back door and the alarm system went off. It was extremely loud and all the lights were flashing all over the outside of the house. I grabbed my phone and ran toward the open back door, but I didn't see anyone. I called the police, but we never found out who tried to break into the house. And to this day, it's my belief that all of the paranormal activity I experienced that night was a warning about what was going to happen. It was as if they were purposely doing things to get my attention and to keep me awake so that I wouldn't forget to set the alarm. My grandmother was a nurse and had been since the Second World War. After the war, her next job was at a nursing home where she worked for many years until her retirement. At the nursing home, one of her residents was a man named Thomas. Thomas couldn't dress himself, but for the most part he really wasn't too difficult to look after. He could speak, but usually didn't, and was a slow-moving man who liked to wheel himself around and be at least an hour early to any meal or activity. Thomas had 2 bird feeders his kids had put outside of his window. They'd bring a new 7-pound bag of birdseed almost every visit, regardless of how much was already in his closet. At first, the maintenance guys took on the bird feeder responsibility, but after a few months, they decided they didn't have the time, and so a nurse called Nellie decided she'd take up the cause. After that, anytime Thomas's bird feeders got low, she'd bring his bag of birdseed out and they'd refill them together. Thomas would get a little down when he couldn't watch his birds at the feeders. So when Nellie took on the responsibility, everyone was so glad to see him perk back up. Nellie took this seriously, and she would never ever let those bird feeders run out. My grandmother said she was a very sweet young woman and seemed to love nothing more than doing a little something extra to make the residents happy. Nellie was reliable, always there a few minutes early, and always happy to help her residents and her co-workers. And as my grandmother always points out at this part of the story, the good often die young. When Nellie was on her way home, a drunk driver hit her head on, and she was only 23 years old when she died. But according to my grandmother, Nellie wasn't really gone. After a week or so, one of the nurses pointed out that they should probably refill the bird feeders, expecting them to be completely empty by now. So they sent Nellie's replacement, Joanne. But when Joanne looked out of Thomas's window, the feeders were already full. And in fact, every time anyone checked, those feeders would always be full. They asked the night shift, the administration, and even the maintenance team, and no one knew who was responsible. Eventually, they all started to joke that it must be Nellie's spirit taking care of Thomas and his bird feeders. About 8 months after Nellie's death, Thomas died from old age. His kids decided they'd donate the bird feeders and left them where they were, along with the giant bags of birdseed in the closet. As time went on, the feeders kept getting filled, and still no one would take the credit. It wasn't long before a new resident moved into Thomas's room, and she also enjoyed the bird feeders outside her window. But without Thomas's kids constantly restocking the seed, the supply eventually ran out. And that's when things started to happen. The new resident would often complain that her closet door must be broken because it would open and close on its own, sometimes really hard. Then a couple of housekeepers complained that any time they hung the new resident's laundry in the closet, the door would slam shut again before they could close it themselves. One woman said that she was just mopping on the other side of the room when the door threw itself open and then shut. Before long, almost everyone working there had witnessed this closet door banging and slamming with no one's assistance. A few of the nurses, including my grandmother, went into the room and asked Nellie or Thomas to please stop, and the reply was always the door slamming itself open or closed, sometimes in rapid succession. Eventually, they had to move the new resident out of the room because the activity started happening every day. My grandmother and one of the other nurses were chatting about the paranormal activity, and it occurred to them that it all started when the birdseed ran out. After work that day, they stopped on their way home and bought a huge bag of seeds. The next day, Grandma opened it up and put it in that closet. Sure enough, the closet didn't open or close on its own, and the bird feeders were once again being mysteriously refilled. From then on, they all took turns making sure the supply never ran out, and they never had to hear the slamming closet door again.